Introducing the second best buffalo thing, Cheetos Crunchy Buffalo. Nothing beats buffalo wings on game day, but with a tangy and cheesy buffalo flavor, Cheetos Crunchy Buffalo is proud to be the second best buffalo thing. Grab Cheetos Crunchy Buffalo today.
The reviews are in for McDonald's hotter, juicier burgers. Let's hear what Hamburglar has to say.
Robble, robble.
What our old friend Hamburglar said is, the patties are juicier. The bun is a thing of beauty. The cheese perfectly melted.
Robble.
My burger dreams have come true. You heard him, folks. These are McDonald's best burgers ever. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Robble. Available at most restaurants in this area. Comparison of McDonald's classic burgers to prior burgers.
When it comes to teaching kids and teens about money, practice makes perfect. That's where Greenlight comes in. With a debit card and money app of their own, kids learn to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest. Parents send instant money transfers, create custom chores, and automate allowance, while kids track their spending, set savings goals, and practice money skills they can use today and for life. Get 1 month free when you sign up at greenlight.com/podcast.
How's it going? And welcome back to On the Wire, proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. Follow the pod on the Twitter at OnTheWirePod. I'm Adam Howe, and as always, I am joined by the 2020 TGFBI champion, Kevin Hastings. Kevin, glad to see we both decided to come back for another go. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much. This is going to be amazing. We have done one episode prior, but this is our first official since the network is launched.
Yeah, that was an amazing day. We got to see Pitcher List 6.0 launch. And if you haven't been there yet, if you're listening to this first and you haven't been to the site, get over there right now. You can pause it, come back, check it out. But it was a long time coming, and it's amazing. And to have 20 other brothers and sisters podcasts, if you will, in the network along with us is just great to be part of that. So we like to celebrate the occasion with our very first guests on the show. And what better guest than friend of every podcast, friend of the industry, the self-proclaimed, I will not make any content myself, if I got that. I heard you say that earlier in a different podcast. That's Yancy Eaton. Yancy, thanks so much for being our very first guest.
Absolutely. Adam, Kevin, thank you so much for having me. This is a pleasure. A couple of weeks ago, I had the pleasure of being on the Pool Hitter podcast with Rob Pietro. I'm not sure how to say his last name, but he's become a pretty good friend of mine. And it was nice to be able to tell him to his face, hey, congratulations on winning the draft championship overall, and to be able to say to you, congratulations on winning TGFBI. I want to win it so bad. I try so hard at TGFBI. I'm thankful to be like top 20 or something overall for the history overall of the league. But to say it to you, even in a shortened season, I think it actually made it more difficult because every move mattered so much more. I think, what did they say, like 2.7 times more or something?
Yep.
And just for you to pull it out, that's honestly such an amazing feat. So it's nice to, like I said, say it to your face. And Adam, thank you for inviting me on. This is cool. I've been on a couple of podcasts before where I was their first guest. And that honestly makes me feel really good because, like I said, I don't try to position myself as an expert or as an analyst. I am solely on podcasts and stuff just to make friends. That's why I'm on Twitter. I don't know anybody in real life that likes baseball, follows it, anything like that. So this is my way of networking, building a community. I do, however, take fantasy extremely seriously. I'm in a ton of leagues. I put a lot of work into it. So I think I have insight, but like I said, it's never been my goal to show everybody how smart I am, but more than pleased to be on this network. Congratulations to you guys making the cut. Basically, I know he had a lot of podcast samples. You guys made the cut. Yeah. And I told you before the show, I talk a lot unless you guys cut me off. So this is me. I'm just going to stop talking.
That's great, Yancy. One key point that you said right there is that you do this to make friends. And I think that's what's great about this industry. And I think it's an absolute undebatable fact that everybody considers you a friend.
I hope so. I have my detractors. I'm sure there's some people that they get tired of me retweeting other people's work, and it almost seems like a parasitic relationship. But I literally don't get anything out of other people getting more followers or sending people to a blog. There's no incentive for it other than it makes me feel really good seeing people like get acknowledged for their work. I work in real estate by day. My wife and I are a husband and wife team here in Southwest Florida. There is no parallel. There's no tie-in to my work professionally. It doesn't benefit me at all. It's just like I said, it's nice to chat it up and talk baseball with you guys. Otherwise, I'm not talking baseball at all if not for that.
I mean, the moment that it does tie in and you sell a house because somebody heard you on a podcast, or
I'm ready for it. I'm not going to say no. I am ready for it. Absolutely.
Today we had you on because you're such a friend of the industry, and also because of your insight that you can provide. To your point, you play in a lot of different leagues, and today we're going to talk about a type of league that we're not really going to talk about most of the regular season, or if at all. Mm-hmm. And that's those 50-round draft and holds, best balls, Cutline. They kind of go that there's no in-season management. You have to set your lineups and what have you. And in Cutline, there are a couple of FAAB periods. But I would love to be able to take time to pick both Kevin's brain and Yancy, your brain, and based on the experience. So why don't you tell me a little bit about the types, how many of these types of leagues have you been playing in? When did you start playing in those leagues? And then for our listeners as well, Kevin, same thing. I'm going to start. I've not played in a best ball league yet, personally. So I'm going to be using this time to pick your guys' brain as much as possible so that the first time I do go in, I've got a little bit of an edge. I've played in a fair share of draft and holds. I actually am in one with you right now, Yancy. And so I'm looking forward to getting a little bit more insight from you guys. So Yancy, to start with you, when did you start playing in those kind of deeper leagues, not so much year-round FAAB pickup leagues, but the draft and holds, the best balls, stuff like that?
Sure. This is my third year actually doing NFBC, what I would consider full time. I used to play on a bunch of different sites, different platforms, different game variants. I still play, like I have a CBS home league. It's a 12-team league, deep keeper. I consider it my home league. It was a friend of mine, Matthew Lepsutter. It was a guy on Twitter that just invited me, and we became really good friends over the years. And now I can consider one of my good friends. I'm in an AL only league with one of the executive producers of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Just a weird name drop. His name's Bryan. Last year, we won our AL only title. I do invite podcasts, industry leagues, that type of thing. I'm always flattered whenever I'm invited, so I can't say no. But the last few years is when I've mostly stepped into NFBC, and that's where most of my volume actually goes. I would say maybe 20 to 25% of that is best balls, BB10s, some of the Fantrax stuff. But most of it is in season-long NFBC. So that's draft champions, that's NFBC 50s. I like to do the RotoWire qualifiers. I'll do an online RotoWire championship. And for me, it's been, the first 2 years, I had a small role, didn't really know what I was doing. Luckily, I have spiritual advisors, I call them, that are some of the best in the industry. This is one of the perks of just making an active attempt at trying to befriend people like this. Vlad Sedler, Toby, Matty Wood. These are the guys that I ask questions to all the time. These are high stakes NFBC players. So the last 2 years, I was cutting my chops, understanding the format. There are nuances to it. There's nuances to draft champions versus Cutline versus any other league that you've played in your home leagues. And learning those at the lowest price point possible has been my goal. And luckily, I've been able to roll the last 2 years. I was profitable both years. And this year, I've stepped it up a little bit, and I'm going to be playing much more. And then, like I said, just the last year and a half really has been me basically having at least one or two draft champions going all off season. That's where I put most of my action, the 15 teamers. I do enjoy the 12s, the NFBC 50s. That's a great way to build a bankroll too. The rake is low, 12 teams, top two pay. You only need to win one or two of those, and you can basically front your entire season worth of action. But last year's, I know this long-winded response, which I'm actually famous for, is the long-winded responses. But yeah, last 2 years. And then, like I said, almost on NFBC. If you guys haven't, I know a lot of people listening to podcasts are probably sick of hearing about it, but it really is worth it to get in there and look around the lobby and see what it is and start, maybe join one league this year. And if you like it, I love the interface. The customer service is amazing. I don't get paid to say this, but it's a great platform. And Kevin, obviously you've had tons of success on it too. I guess I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, mine is actually very similar to Yancy. About 3 years of playing in NFBC leagues. The first year I played, to Yancy's point, to get in and try it out, I did one draft champions and one Cutline. And then I increased that up. And last season, I started doing some of the Fantrax best balls. And one point before we forget, as we get into this, different platforms have different scoring for their best balls, and it changes things drastically. So that's just one thing I don't want to forget to bring up. And this year, like Yancy said, when you get success, that increases your funds that you have. And I've done 3 draft champions and 4 best ball drafts so far. I'm in 3 home leagues with a lot of overlap, a lot of the same guys playing the same 3 leagues, all keeper leagues on CBS as well. So I'm probably sitting at about, and last year was supposed to be my first live event for NFBC. I was all booked and ready to go. And I prefer auction. All three of those home leagues are auctions. And so I was going to do the auction championship rather than the main event. That is still the plan for this year. I think that is a go for later in March. Hopefully that's still going to work out. But yeah, I'm looking at about 10 leagues right now, and I'll probably do one more draft champions and a few more best balls. Those are, in my mind, that's the best way to do mock draft. And you can do them very inexpensively. There's $10 ones out there.
There's $5 ones out there now.
Yeah, I would thought there was. Yeah, It's just great.
What's nice is like reminding me when I went to Vegas, going down like downtown Vegas looking for the $5 blackjack table.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, great. I appreciate the fact that you guys bring so much to the table on this. I, of course, have my home league as well. It's a dynasty league. Been playing since 2001. That's on Yahoo, so it sounds like I'm the only one playing on Yahoo.
That is a really long-lasting league. That's very impressive.
Yeah. We've had the same core, which is nice. Probably the same 6 or 7 guys out of 12 that have been in there since almost the beginning. And then we rotated about 5 or 6 roster spots every 3 or 4 years. Sometimes we get a guy in there for 1 or 2 years and then he's like bounce. And then other times it's, we get lucky and the guy sticks around for about 10 years. So that's nice. So I'm happy about that. But it's those 50 rounders that I don't have a ton of experience in. So looking forward to picking your guys' brain on that. Before we get started on that, though, we're gonna go into what Kevin and I call our movable targets. These are a couple of guys that are going at or around or preferably after pick 350 ADP. You can use almost any time period you want in NFBC. That's typically the best place to look for ADP data. So roughly around 350. Of course, these guys are going to have min-max picks that are going to range anywhere probably between 250 and 500, 600. So I'm going to start it off. I'm going to give off, I told Kevin this earlier. I hope I'm not shooting myself in the foot on this one, but I'm going to recommend, I'm picking up Robbie Ray toward the end of my draft. Now, again, these are going to be guys that you're getting closer to your end of your regular drafts where you're going to be able to use FAAB. You're going to be able to drop guys. You're going to be able to pick new guys up. I did actually just draft Robbie Ray around pick 250-ish in that draft and hold that we're in, Yancy. And ultimately, the logic here is that I totally understand that Robbie Ray is not what you would call a good pitcher. He throws whatever he wants, but he doesn't even know where it's going to go. But you can't get a guy who's going to throw up that many strikeouts, regardless of what his ratios are going to be come the end of the year that late in the draft. And we're got a guy who's projected as long as he stays in the rotation, which he's set to be in the rotation for the Blue Jays at least at the start of the year. And something that we talked about last week, something that I'm really looking forward in these last couple picks is these are guys that I don't expect to be on my roster past maybe month 1 at the most. Now, if Robbie Ray all of a sudden figures it out and all of a sudden becomes that pitcher he could have been, or he was that 1 year, then maybe he stays on a little bit longer. But I don't have a problem having guys I'm going to put in my lineup or in my rotation for the first couple weeks. And the Blue Jays have, I think, 1 off day in like the first 3 weeks of the season. So there's also a possibility that he gets a 2-start week in one of those first couple weeks as well. So racking up those counting stats, the Blue Jays are going to be a good team. He's got a good offense, good defense behind him. He has a chance, as long as he's not completely wild, to go 5. Even last year when he was completely wild and walking the world, he was still going 5 innings. He was still qualifying for wins or at least decisions. And I could see that being an opportunity to rack up quite a few strikeouts at the beginning of the season, especially in leagues where maybe you didn't go that route early on in your drafts. So I'm curious to know if you guys think that's just there's too much room for error there, or if that's a route that you've gone in any of your drafts, or is something that you might consider. Kevin, what do you think?
I like I told you earlier today, I like it.
That's why I asked you first, because I knew you were going to say you liked it.
Yeah, I have drafted him. I've drafted him in a couple of my best balls. I know you have him in a draft champions, but he's a perfect guy for a best ball because his blow up starts don't hurt you. Hopefully you have somebody else that's going to have a better week and he's just knocked out automatically for you. But I think for what we're talking about, at the end of drafts, a guy that we want to take a look at for a couple of weeks. It's not going to hurt our feelings if we let him go early in the season. He's a perfect pick.
Yep, I will, to piggyback on what Kevin's saying, we didn't really touch on the differences between these. With a 50-round draft and hold, we're literally drafting 50 rounds, and that is the only player pool that we get to use for the entire season. So no in-season transactions, no FAAB, and especially no trading to prevent collusion in most of these leagues. Actually, all of them. I'll go ahead and say all draft and hold leagues, you cannot trade and you cannot make any transactions. So a player like Robbie Ray, the difference between a best ball versus, and that's my dog crying, I warned you guys, he's upset. A player like a Robbie Ray, where you're taking in a draft and hold, I'm less inclined to do something like that just because whenever I start him in a draft and hold, I'm wearing that score for the entire year. It's a rotisserie league. Those points count. The ratios count. If he walks 8 batters in 2.5 innings, which he has done before in the past, that you're going to have to wear that all season. And a best ball, however, that just means that he didn't make your starting roster for that week. And that's fine. But somebody like a Robbie that does have an immense strikeout potential, that's exactly the type of pitcher that I want to take a flyer on in a best ball league, which is points, because you basically reset every single week. It's like fantasy football, only you're just trying to build out the best possible lineup that you can. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I will say this. There are differences, obviously, between just like Cutline versus a standard 50-round draft and hold. The biggest distinction between the two of those, obviously, is with a Cutline, most of them are 10 teams. You will find some 12-team variants, depending on what site you play on. But they offer 2 and sometimes 3, in the case of the NFBC, actual FAAB periods where you can add players. You have a very small budget. It's a fraction. Most of the time, it's 10% of what a normal budget would be. And you're able to fill in holes. What it does accomplish is it takes out a ton of the in-season management, and it makes it much easier for dead teams to still be involved. I've been on leagues like this before where they were draft and hold or best balls or whatever, and it was like, if I could just pick up one player, I would win this league. You know what I mean? I need one first baseman. I need a warm body, or I need a catcher. I only drafted 2 catchers in a 2-catcher league and I don't have a backup. It fills in for that. So those are the things to take into consideration. Also, between best ball and 50-round draft and hold, another thing that is vastly different between the two sites, NFBC and Fantrax does not take into account multi-position eligibility. So
right, everybody's got one position, right?
Everybody has one position. So a player like a Jeff McNeil or a Max Muncy or Joey Wendell, right? Those players, Luis Urias, I'm trying to think of players that have 2 or 3 eligibilities. Those players lose a lot of value because they can only be one position. And Fantrax is very stringent with that, and it causes you to have to take redundancies at positions. You have to have 2 or 3 of every single position. In some cases, depending on like outfielders, you need 10 or 12 outfielders in some cases, depending on the quality of outfielders that you draft. I personally am not a fan of that just because I feel like it doesn't reward a full player's talent. It doesn't. If I'm able to play multiple positions, and I have actually shown that on the diamond, I would like for that to reflect into the scoring. On NFBC, you can do that, and it actually automates which of those in the best ball you would be playing. So if Ketel Marte last year was second base and outfield, and he was your highest scorer in the outfield, but in second base you had, I don't know, Jose Altuve one of the weeks he went off or something, it would have automatically slotted Jose Altuve in. This is a really long way of me saying this, but you have to know the disparities in points. Know that, hey, stolen bases actually get devalued in one format. In Roto, we're pushing all of these different hitters up, and that's why you see certain hitters fall way down in a best ball points format, because you don't care how you get those points, you just care that you get them. So all of a sudden, Mondesi is not the back end of the second round pick anymore. He gets pushed down multiple rounds because he strikes out a ton. Those stolen bases aren't worth as much as a home run. And that's why you see those discrepancies. So I know I just hijacked the conversation there, but
you just hit on 5 of the different sections that we're going to talk about throughout the pod, all into one spot. So it's perfect. It's just like a little preview.
I will say this. Let me kick it back to Kevin a little bit because I've been talking a lot, but knowing your rules, you guys will see this a lot. Justin Mason espouses this all the time. You have to know the differences between these. I cannot tell you how many times I've been in a draft lobby and we're in the 4th round. Everybody's, wait, is this points or is this Roto? Or when do I set lineups? And it is unbelievable. People are putting really hard-earned United States dollars into this, but just know your rules, know the setup.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of the pitcher list staff mocks that we do early in the year when the playoffs are still happening. And there's definitely a handful, maybe just like 1 or 2 people they go into their recaps and they're like, oh, this was Roto. I thought this was head to head and I would have drafted completely differently. So it's good to know and a good thing that's a mock. But ultimately, yes, to echo what you said, you got to know all the intricacies, all the rules, especially if you're joining like not even a high stakes one, but if you're joining like a home leagues for somebody else, if you've got a dynasty league, make sure they have a constitution. If they have a constitution, just go through that thing with a fine tooth comb. All right, on from Robbie Ray. We're going to go over to Kevin. Who you got at the end of your drafts?
I took another Robbie. here, and I was really intrigued. I went with Robbie Grossman, and the sort I used for ADP, I wanted to see how he was being drafted after he was signed. So I went over the past month. That was 11 days after he signed, and he's still outside the top 350. Now, one of the cool things that NFBC has added this season is when you click on the player, you can look at a graph of how they've been drafted since the beginning, since the first draft they did. And he has moved up in drafts. He was well outside the top 400 until mid-December. And then about the time he signed, started moving inside, moving up to where he is. But what's really interesting to me is since the Mazzara signing, he's getting drafted later again. And I'm not concerned about the Mazzara signing for Robbie Grossman's playing time. He's a switch hitter. He's penciled in to lead off. I think that will be the case. He may miss an extra game or two here and there, or part of a game, not start, come in and pinch hit because he is a switch hitter. But I don't think he's going to lose a lot due to the Mazzara signing. It probably hurts Victor Reyes and maybe even Jacoby Jones more. And the schedule for the first couple of weeks of the season, I don't think this is a guy outside the top 350. I'm not planning on using him all the time. They open up with the Indians. Obviously, on opening day, that's going to be Shane Bieber. Every team in baseball is scheduled to play 3 games in that first partial week. So I don't think I play him then. However, in the second week, the first full week of the season, they play 6 games. And the following week, they play 7. He gets to face the back end of the Twins rotation for the first period coming out of the gate. And in NFBC leagues, that's the first half week where you can switch hitters out typically on Friday. And then he gets the Indians that weekend. And the Indians schedule is funny. They have 2 off days in 3 days in the first full week. So even if they try to roll Bieber out there every 5th day, regardless of schedule, and skip the guys at the back end, he's probably going to miss Bieber that weekend. And then he's got the Astros and the Athletics for 7 games in the second full week. Now, in these 2 weeks, there are some teams that only have 5-game weeks. So this is a guy for those 2 weeks I might be playing instead of my 5th or even 4th outfielder because he's going to be playing more often. He's hitting at the top of a lineup. The lineup that may not be nearly as bad as a lot of people think, at least that top half with Scope behind him. Miggy, we talked about him last week, Adam. Candelario hitting cleanup. There is a nice potential to pile up some counting stats with him the first couple weeks of the season. And if it works out as well as I think it might, you might end up using him even longer than that.
Yeah, to your point, Kevin, we talked about that, I think, with Miggy last week as well. Just the fact that you do have a 7-game weekend there. You have a 6-game weekend there. That's huge, especially early in the season. The games you play in April count just as much as the games you play in September. So you're always playing catch up in September. You're trying to pick up that FAAB guy that's going to, steal that extra base, that's going to hit that extra home run or score a couple extra runs. And you might as well be doing that at the very beginning of the season with guys who are going to play. And Rob, he signed a 2-year contract. He's somebody that the Tigers know that they're going to have around for 2 years. I don't think they signed, to your point, I don't think they signed him to platoon, especially if he's a switch hitter and if it's expected that he's going to be close to the top or at the top of that lineup. I think this is a great pick, especially in the mentality that we talk about. Again, this might not be a guy you hold on all season. You might have an injury somewhere else. You might need to drop somebody. And he's a guy that after the first couple of weeks of the season, you're not going to feel that bad dropping him, especially if you need to fill another hole due to an injury in a different position, or you see a 2-start pitcher. You can drop him. It's not going to hurt you that much, but you're still going to be able to get the best aspects of his game early on in the season.
I actually agree with that. And the one thing that you guys surprisingly didn't touch on is he stole 8 bags last year.
Well, we're saving that for you.
He stole 8 bags last year. That is insane. I think you could do much worse, Kevin. I love the pick. like you guys alluded to, he signed a 2-year, $10 million contract, and most likely it looks like they're not going to be contending this year, and they're most likely not going to be contending next year. They're still ways off. So this is a really nice contract for him, but it only returns value if they play him and they're able to move him for somebody else. He's a 31-year-old, I don't want to say journeyman outfielder, but he's a 31-year-old outfielder of whom they have no history with. They don't care how much he gets hurt or they wear him out. They want to maximize his value and trade him. That's what's going to happen. That's best case scenario for us too, by the way, is if he is balling out and he gets traded, it's because he was really good and, it works out. 8 home runs, 8 stolen bases last year. I'm actually really intrigued to see how much speed actually carries over to 2021, but I love that pick. Very quickly, I don't know how to follow rules. Sorry, my dog keeps knocking my stuff down, guys. I'm really sorry. I don't know how to follow rules. I have a couple I'm going to rattle off very quickly and just give you a quick hit onto why I picked them. CJ Cron, I know you guys saw he just signed with Colorado. It is the best possible landing spot for 2 reasons. One, obviously you guys know Coors Field is a bandbox. It's super easy to hit well there. I actually took a screenshot of this. Derek Carty actually posted what his bat projection would be, assuming he had 600 plate appearances, which he's not going to get 600 plate appearances. I know this, but he would have a 274 batting average with 35 home runs, 97 RBI, 82 runs scored, and a 366 weighted on base average. Just insane. If you look at the depth chart that they have right there, they have the corpse of Ian Desmond. They have Josh Fuentes, and I think they have one other option, but long story short, they signed him because they're going to, yes, it's a minor league contract, but I think he breaks camp with the team, and I think he gets a majority of the playing time at first. Another pick for me very quickly, Miles Straw. He's going at an ADP of 386th in the last 2 weeks. He's only outfield eligible, which last year he did have shortstop, which was kind of nice. You still need to start 5 outfielders in most leagues. If you look at his projections, he's only projected to hit 4 home runs, but he's tied for 5th in projected stolen bases this year with Trevor Story and Fernando Tatis. Again,
he's slated to be the starting center fielder.
Yeah, and he's gonna be playing almost every single day. There is the chance that the bottom kind of falls out on this, and he just does not get on base enough to warrant him playing every single day. But like I said, you could do much worse if you're really in a need for speed, especially in obviously a rotisserie league. I think you could do much worse. And the third one, Jake McGee, 493rd overall. Now we're getting really deep. Kevin, I know you've probably seen this as well because you're looking at the rolling ADP graphs on NFBC. So whenever a player signs, his ADP instantly spikes for a little bit, and then it goes back down. Because whenever you get into the draft lobby of most of these places, they're showing you a cumulative draft ADP for the entire offseason. So it takes months sometimes for that ADP to crawl up to where it's commensurate to where they actually should be taken. The thing, it can be said about Jake McGee. He's being buried right now, and it's going to take weeks and weeks for him to reflect where he's actually going. I understand that there is several relievers there, Reyes Maranta, Rogers. There's lots of options there for them to close. But right now, he's going to back into some saves. He had a career resurgence last year. He had a 14K per 9 with the Dodgers. I think you could do much worse. And then lastly, I did one more. I told you guys I did a ton of homework. Colin Moran at 398th. Colin Moran is going to play every single day. He is super boring. But in these draft champions, whenever you're drafting 50 rounds and there's 15 players, that's a lot of players that are being taken, right? Playing time is gold. You're not looking for studs. You're not looking for sleepers. You're looking for somebody who's going to play every single day, and Colin Moran gives you that. I think that's the textbook example of the types of players you should be targeting in these later rounds like this. And at an ADP of almost 400, I think you can't go wrong with that. So that's just a couple of them. I could keep going with literally 15 names, but there's lots of names like that where you have to acknowledge that they're going to have some warts in their game, and that's why they're going that late. But if you prioritize playing time over anything else, and you can pick your spots and manage their playing time, a player like Cedric Mullins, for instance, he's 3rd percentile in expected batting average if you look at StatCast, right? Expected slugs, super low, but he steals a lot of bases. He's 97% percentile sprint speed. That is a fast player. And if you put him in the right situations, he can steal you 2 or 3 bases on a weekend. Swap him out for a Friday series against, whomever, the Red Sox in their awful rotation, and all of a sudden you have 3 bags in a weekend. But again, that's me talking long. That's, I think, 5 names. But just be mindful of the ADP, and be mindful that a player like Amir Garrett still is not showing up in the draft lobby where he is actually being taken. So don't feel bad if you have to reach 50, 60 picks off of ADP to go get your guy.
Yeah, this is something we talked about a lot on our last episode. Feel free to go back and listen to that. Don't be afraid to set those mins for guys that you really want, especially if you're on the turn early in the draft. The later you go in drafts, ADP just gets thrown right out the window. It really doesn't make any difference. Like I said, I picked a Robbie Ray around 250. His ADP is right around 350. So it's like I jumped him up 100 picks just because it made sense for my roster, or at least made sense for what I was trying to do at that time. I think I just picked up Carter Keyboom really late in the draft, but again, it was probably about 75, 80 picks above what his ADP was, just because that's what I needed at that moment. All right, Yancy, thank you. This will be good fodder for those listening as they scroll through all the different players that we talked about. We're going to jump into, you know what? Actually, before we do that, I did want to touch on one thing. So we are going to be focusing on FAAB. On FAAB betting throughout the season. And Kevin, this is something we didn't talk about last week as well. So I wanted to throw this over to you guys. And I definitely want to focus this on any other guests that we have on the show is quickly, Yancy, quickly, what overall feeling do you have? Now we're talking a lot about draft champions and the draft and holds, best holds and what have you, where there's no FAAB, but we are going to be a show that focuses around FAAB. So give me your, 2-minute elevator speech on what do you do during the season when it comes to FAAB? Do you have a set strategy that you use throughout the season? Are there tricks that you have picked up that you found that worked for you? Or do you just wing it throughout the season based on whatever happens?
Okay, so very quickly, everybody pays for saves. Everybody. If you don't pay for it in the draft, you're going to be paying for it all season long. Every single league is different. I'm not saying that you need to make sure that you have 2 stud closers, because what does that even mean? Every single year, it's so variable. But you just need to be mindful of closer situations, and you need to be early on people. If you wait until a guy is locked in and the manager says he's the closer and he got 2 saves over the weekend, you're going to be spending a third of your FAAB budget, and that is not sustainable over the long term. Secondly, work on your FAAB throughout the week. Things happen on the weekends. People do things. We have families. We have jobs. We have barbecues. We have our cat getting baptized, whatever it is, you need to be working on your FAAB if you're going to be serious about this, because I guarantee you the best players out there, they work on it all week long. The guys I mentioned earlier, Vlad, Toby, Matty Wood, those guys are literally working on it every single day. So if you can start to piecemeal it throughout the week as opposed to just trying to cram every single thing the day that your FAAB is due, that's going to be incredibly helpful. Also, no matter how good you think your team is or how deep you think your team is, you need to be incrementally improving your team. And you also need to allocate a budget to where no matter how much I want certain players, depending on how much time is left in the year, you need to have a budget at the end of the year. I have been caught in situations where I was gunning for the league title, but I spent all of my money and there was 2 weeks left. I could not add a player and I took a 0 in one spot and it cost me $1,000. You see what I'm saying? So just know exactly how long the season is, divide up whatever your FAAB budget is. If it's $1,000 and the season lasts 6 months, roughly how many dollars you need to spend per week. And you need to be disciplined whenever it comes to that. Pick your spots. Obviously, yes, sometimes it does matter if you go in on a player and you hit correctly, but for the most part, you need to be calculated and you're incrementally improving your team every single week.
And Kevin, I'm going to quickly go to same question for you, but I don't want to take away too much from what you'll be presenting at PitchCon 2021 later on this week. Listening to this early in the week, Kevin, you'll be presenting on a panel for PitchCon and if you're not familiar with PitchCon, go check it out, pitcherlist.com. You'll find it and all the information is there. And you'll be presenting on this very subject. Kevin, what kind of advice can you give our listeners quickly about FAAB in general? And we'll be picking your brain throughout this course of the season as well.
First of all, I agree with everything Yancy said, 100%. And a couple of things that I learned in the short season that were easier to do. And we talk about it a lot and we know we should do it, but we don't always do it in a 162 game season. I was just talking about this with a buddy yesterday. Letting go a guy when you need that roster spot that's injured for 4 to 6 weeks and it's May. Now, in that situation, you're not dropping Mike Trout, but a guy that you don't want to let go, you might have to. It was a lot easier to do last year. I'm going to try to continue to do. And also be aggressive without being reckless. Especially getting the guys early, Yancy talked about, when they're a little less expensive. Mm-hmm. But there's a real fine line there. If you don't cross it and do something that in hindsight you think was reckless a time or two, then you're not being aggressive enough, in my mind. So it's really hard to ride that line, especially keeping that budget, like Yancy said. But a time or two, you do want to reach. And the third thing, and I talked about this last season quite a bit, is don't look back. If you make a mistake, don't dwell on it. Learn from it, but don't dwell on it. That didn't cost you your season. Adjust, react to it, keep going. So in a generalization was the types of things I was bringing up there, but I think they're very important.
If I can add one more thing very quickly, don't pay for what a player did. pay what they're going to do, right? You can say this for all facets of life, including NFL free agency. Just because a player was really good for 10 years does not mean he's going to be good, whatever. Don't spend money on like the flavor of the week who is an older player who just got hot. I'll give you a perfect example. Jason Hayward hitting 3 home runs in a week, and then all of a sudden he goes for 15% of your FAAB budget. At this point in time, we know who Jason Hayward is. I have made this mistake before with him multiple times because I want to believe. I'm the guy that spent 10% of his budget in TGFBI on G-Man Choi because he all of a sudden was a switch hitter, and I thought he's going to play every single day now, and he's going to hit for power. Like, I was that sucker. Don't be that sucker. Honestly, think about, what do I win if I win? If I get this player, what is he realistically going to give me? And if you're constantly reaching for outliers and you're paying for the best week of a player's life, I think overall that's a losing strategy.
Couldn't agree more. Let's get away from FAAB. We'll be talking about FAAB for the entire season. And we're going to dive into these, I call them the 50 rounders. They don't all go 50 rounds, of course, but they do go a little deeper than your typical roto leagues. That's your draft and holds, draft champions, whether they be the NFBC 50s versus your best balls versus your Cutline. Yancy, you talked about this a little bit earlier. So Kevin, I'm going to go to you. Kevin, give me a breakdown on the major differences between best ball, Cutline, and a typical draft and hold.
Right. Yancy spelled this out in nice detail earlier. The draft and holds.
I didn't mean to jump the show outline, by the way. I had it upside down. I apologize.
No, it's perfect. Draft 50 rounds, no transactions during the season, but you do set your lineup on the NFBC format, and even others are adopting this now. You can change your hitters out for the weekend, but not your pitching. They're locked in for a week. Best balls, draft is over. You're done for the season. It takes your best lineup for the week. Different platforms do have differences in scoring. And also, as Yancy said, position eligibility is different on different platforms. Then your cut lines do add a couple of FAAB periods. He spelled that all out perfectly earlier. And he also mentioned, which is what I know you're getting to, Adam, here. This is why you see the stolen base specialists dropping ADP in best balls. This is why you see closers dropping ADP in best balls. There comes a point where they might be the best player available for scoring points, but you're not missing out on a save category. So they're not as important earlier in the draft. And every format, every platform has differences. I really like to, whether you use a projection system or not, I think most people at least look at a couple. Take a projection system you like the most, right? Don't just run it through a calculator on one of the sites. Download it to Excel. Just make a column that has the scoring system for the league and adds up the points they would score by that projection system. The reason I like to do that is because then you can adjust those projections, and that will adjust that points. You resort it and you see how players move around. That is something I do for every different format of best balls that I play, or any points-based league.
Yeah, that's nice because those calculators, the Fangraphs auction calculator, I'll throw that one out there, is super convenient. It is super nice. Whatever draft software you end up using, it can be super useful. But to your point, you can't manipulate it. You can put in the scoring categories and the points and all that to make sure it fits the rules of your league. But whatever projection you end up picking, that's what you're stuck with. So to be able to manipulate it on your own, that's a great point. You alluded to it just now, so I'm going to jump right into it. I looked up a bunch of players that are dropping between either a best ball or a typical draft and hold. And I wanted to get your guys' take on these guys as to why. And you alluded to a couple of these already, but a couple of starting pitchers that are dropping, they have a lower ADP in best ball compared to draft and hold. Now, I use the best ball 12s that NFBC does versus the NFBC 50s draft and holds that they do, so I can compare 12 team versus 12 team. We have Hyun Ryu in for the Blue Jays, Tony Gonsolin, Nate Pearson, Michael Kopech, and Dane Dunning. They all have a very large decrease in ADP in a best ball league versus their draft and hold. So what is it about these guys specifically that makes them less desirable on average in a best ball league?
So just looking at this list, right, we could do a flyby on these people real quick, like a Hyun Ryu. He's really good on a rate basis. There's oftentimes been questions about his durability. So in a best ball where you're trying to figure out like exactly how much volume you're going to get out of a player, volume is king. That's why you see a discrepancy between the 50s versus the BB12s. If I'm an NFBC 50, I want good players in there. And somebody that has elite ratios, those ratios stick with me for the entire season. I want a Hyun Ryu. That's a top 100 player. Whenever he's pitching, he is good. The question is volume. So he takes a hit in a standard BB12, right? I'll just do two of these. Kevin, I'll kick it over to you. But Tony Gonsolin, for example, in the 50s, he's going 205th. In the BB12, he's going 238. Again, this is just trying to figure out what exactly is his volume situation. Whenever they signed Trevor Bauer, we saw an instantaneous dip between his and Dustin May's ADP. All of a sudden, it's just uncertain when we're going to be able to use him. He is more appropriate in a best ball whenever we make sure that we capture this. We just mentioned that in NFBC, our pitching is locked for the week. We can swap hitters out twice a week, but with pitching, we are screwed. So with a team like the Dodgers or a team like the Mariners, who's going to a 6-team rotation, it's a leap of faith whether or not they pitch that week or not. And I cannot take a 0. I need that volume. In a best ball, I don't have to worry about that. I just draft good pitchers and the cream rises to the top. If he ended up starting that week and I didn't even know that he was slated to start, I got those points and those are locked in. So that kind of explains the discrepancy between those two. Kevin, if you want to take on some of these other names right here, you're more than welcome to, but you'll see a recurring theme here, which is volume, right? One prioritizes volume over the other, and you're going to see that a lot in the discrepancies with the AVP.
Absolutely. And all three of these guys go in a similar spot, right? Nate Pearson, Michael Kopech, Dane Dunning. They're also similar in that they're young guys. We expect to be in rotations, but may have issues. And the one most interesting to me, I think, is actually the one going the latest, Dane Dunning, I think. And I could be wrong, of course, but I think he might get more of that volume you're talking about, Yancy, than the other two. Yep. And so it's exactly what you're talking about for all three of these guys.
Yeah, Kopech was announced he's fighting for a spot in the rotation. He's going to be actually quote unquote trying out for it during spring training. So there's no guarantee there either. So on the hitter side, you guys have that list in front of you as well. But I think I know the answer for two of these, but I'll rattle them off for you. Kevin, we got Manuel, Margot, John Berti. Margot's going 248 in the 50s. And 328, almost 100 picks later in the best balls. John Berti going 250 in the 50s. Sorry, in the NFBC, the draft and hold. And then the best balls, he's going 315. And then after that, we got Wander Franco and Wilson Ramos. These are four guys I saw had the biggest discrepancies. There are others, but these four guys had the biggest discrepancies between these two formats. Kevin, what's the similarity here?
As Yancy and I have both alluded to, the stolen base factor is huge here as for Margot and John Berti. They don't count for that specific category. They score points, but they're not specifically sought after, those stolen bases. Wander Franco is interesting to me, but I think it boils down to in the 50s, in the draft and holds, you are setting your lineup each week. And if he is in the minor leagues, he is not an option for you. But later in the season, most people agree that he will get called up at some point. He becomes an option. In the best ball 12s, he's just sitting there and he's not doing anything for you. Like he's a 0. If he gets put in your lineup, you didn't have a good week. Yeah. So he's going to go a little higher in the leagues where you decide, nope, he's on my bench. He's a stash. I'm just holding on to him. Hopefully the Rays bring him up sooner rather than later, as opposed to a best ball where you're hoping the same thing, but you're taking up a spot, especially when some of these leagues have multiple utility spots. Some of them players are locked into one position. You really need to maximize the number of players that you have scoring points every week right out of the gate so that you can get the best possible score each week.
That's great. I'm gonna jump back. I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit based on the comments you made about Franco. What do you guys think about what is your guys' strategy about picking younger guys, prospects even, in these drafts and holds? Is there value in that? So I just drafted Franco in that draft and hold that we're in. And my instinct is that these are guys that if and when they do come up, I'm probably going to consider spending a lot of FAAB, especially if it's early in the season. And so my logic here is that if I'm going to spend a lot of money on FAAB in a regular Roto league, that it gives me the confidence to boost them up around a couple rounds in a draft and hold draft scenario. And so instead of paying for them in FAAB, I'm paying for them in draft capital. Where's the flaw in that logic? Break that down. You guys have been doing this a lot longer than I have. So Yancy, is there logic to that? Or have you found that it more often than not that there's not success in that?
I mean, with every scenario, there's multiple ways to win, right? And I'm never going to say that this is the only way you should do it. But from personal experience with me, I have 50 roster spots. You guys know this in baseball, a lot of things happen. 45% of pitchers land on the aisle at some point during the season. Hitters go down. Everything happens. Those roster spots they're not just fungible assets. Like, they're incredibly valuable and you need those. With a player like Franco specifically, you guys see this. I'm wearing a Charlotte Stone Crabs hat. It is well known in the industry. I love I love the Rays. I almost cussed. Thank God I didn't. I know this is a pitcher like podcast. I love the Rays, but best case scenario is they bring him up after the Super 2 deadline. And then he's basically a bench bat or he's pinch running like this. I'm not being facetious here. I think that there's no chance that they bump up his arbitration numbers so much to where he is able to return enough value to justify the draft capital. In rotisserie leagues, I would say, yes, absolutely. I think that whenever he does come up and if he's given the playing time that he could potentially get, it could be a worthy investment. And in something like a points, though, like I said, where I just don't think that the volume is going to be there. They platoon everybody outside of Willie Adames, and Brandon Lau plays most days, even versus lefties, which is a bit of a surprise. But in that particular situation, I personally don't think that you can do that just because you need those spots. But if I am going to do that, I'm going to do that with one type of player, right? Oftentimes, you'll see people who are taking shots where they have a Wander Franco, and then maybe they have a Forrest Whitley, or they have Noah Syndergaard and Chris Sale. And you start looking up and down the roster and you realize, wow, they have 3 prospects and they have 3 players who are injured right now. Now, we don't even know when they're going to be making their debut during the season. And then you realize that's 20% of the roster is unusable. And so these teams are buried. In the case of Wander Franco specifically, I haven't taken him anywhere. I don't think I will. I just don't think he gets enough playing time to warrant the cost. But again, I understand why people do it. He's the number 1 prospect in baseball, but it's just not something that I've found to be an effective strategy for me, so I probably won't be doing it.
Well, that's fair. That answers my question. I don't feel good about it, but it answers my question.
I think you can take a chance on one or two guys like that late in these drafts. And like Yancy talked about it earlier, I pick old, boring guys, and it seems like nobody else wants them. It seems like you can get them in the 40s. Adam Wainwright last year was extremely valuable to me. Guys that generally perception for most fans of baseball and fantasy baseball players that they aren't very good. Like, I have Kyle Gibson in several leagues because he's going to pitch every day and he's a veteran. And that short season last year, he wasn't good. But the Texas Rangers have done good things with veteran pitchers in recent years. Those types of guys. Josh Harrison, who can play all over the infield. He's an old, boring guy. Nobody wants him. But when somebody gets injured that you drafted in the 12th round, you have him to put in there. But 1 or 2 shots on somebody that you could strike gold for the exact reason you said. If it was a rotisserie league and it came up in the middle of the season that he was coming up, people would be blowing 75% of their FAAB on. It can be worth a shot on 1 or 2 of them, but you can't have many of them on your roster. Yancy said 3 of them and 3 injured guys to start out. You can't do that.
Yeah. And also another interesting wrinkle specifically within FBC, and Kevin, this, unless you start the season with a minor league player that does not have any major league experience on your roster, you cannot add him during the season until he officially gets called up and plays in a game. So this is why you see these weeks, they call them Fabapalooza or Fabageddon. Whenever you have multiple players, what was it last year? It was like Nicky Lopez and Austin Riley, and it was like the last
2 years ago.
2 years ago. Sorry,
yeah.
Time is a flat circle. COVID, everything.
Yep.
2 years ago, and that's literally because they couldn't add those people. We saw these players raking in the minors, we couldn't add them. Again, to your credit, Adam, like people recognize that, they see that, and they say, if I'm going to be spending a fourth or a third of my budget in season, and I do think that there's a very high likelihood that he's going to be called up relatively soon to start the season, then absolutely take your shot there, just as long as you've built the rest of your team around it. It can't be a decision that's made in a vacuum where you're just randomly taking Wander Franco with your 220th overall pick. You have to build components around him, and maybe you have a redundancy at shortstop to where you can bridge the gap, or you take somebody like a Miguel Rojas in case your starting shortstop gets, hurt or something. You need to make moves and concessions further along in your draft to facilitate that. But absolutely, that's the type of lottery ticket that if you're going to do one in draft, you should be making it.
All right, getting back to the best ball. So a couple guys on here that they get big jumps in ADP in a best ball format versus through draft and holds. We can start with the pitchers. Kevin, why are these guys getting that kind of a pump? So we have Marquez, Eduardo Rodriguez, Justus Sheffield, Mike Minor, Matthew Boyd. All these guys have about 100 picks, or right around 100 pick jumps, or maybe just under 100 pick jumps in a best ball format. And what is it about these guys that they provide more value in best ball than in a draft and hold?
I'll do Yancy did earlier. I'll do a couple and leave the rest. German Marquez, it's the Coors Field home starts. You don't have to decide if you want him in your lineup in the best ball format. Mm-hmm. If he gets blown up at Coors, if he gets blown up at home, he's not going to be in your lineup that week. If he has a 2-start week, one of them's at home and one of them's away, that's always the tough decision with him. If he has a decent start at home, or even a good one because he does once in a while, then he's in your lineup. You don't have to make that decision. So he is extremely valuable in a best ball format, and that's easy. And I'll jump down to the last one, and I'll let Yancy have the three in the middle here. Matthew Boyd, it can be dominant, but we don't know when. So he's much better in a best ball format. When he gets blown up, he's not going to be in your lineup. It's similar to Marquez, but with Marquez, we know, but sometimes he can surprise us and have a better start at home than we might expect. He rarely has a bad start on the road, so I wouldn't say he surprises us on that front. But Matthew Boyd, we just don't know. We don't know when he's going to give up 4 home runs in an inning and a third, but at times he can be dominant. So he's much more valuable in a best ball format.
I wish you could see my notes, because I literally wrote for Matthew Boyd a hypothetical scenario wherein he gives up 4 home runs in a start. That's what I wrote down. And that is your worst case scenario, but he also has strikeout upside. So going back to your Robbie Ray pick, that is the perfect archetype of a pitcher to where you don't have to stress out about it if he completely blows up one week. So what? He doesn't make your starting lineup. To talk about what you were mentioning with Marquez, right? The most brutal part of owning Marquez isn't the fact that he pitches half of his games in Coors, because at this point we're all acclimated to it. That's why his ADP is where it is, right? Which, on a separate note, if he ever gets traded, he's going to be like a top 50 overall player, by the way. But we all know this. The most brutal part about owning Marquez is whenever he's at Coors and he pitches well. That's what drives people crazy. Because if you look at his career splits, it's actually not that bad. I think in all seriousness, he is one of the top 15 pitchers in the league, easily, in my opinion. And he's just being buried in Coors. To touch on some of these other guys, though, like a Justus Sheffield, you see that his ADP is much better in the 50s versus a best ball. Again, it goes back to volume. We've already heard from the Mariners organization, they're going to be doing a 6-man rotation. So he's almost never going to get 2-start weeks, which is just brutal from a volume standpoint. We've seen that his control is an issue, right? So you would think ratios, doesn't that mostly play into like a rotisserie league? Yes, it does. But also, if you're a hyper inefficient pitcher, you don't go deep into games. So that plays into it as well. A pitcher like Mike Minor, again, he's fine. It is insane to see that his ADP is so much higher, 321 versus 235 in a BB12. That something like that I don't even know how to explain that, to be honest with you. I think last year, yeah, I don't have a great answer for that. It's unusual to see something like that big of a disparity, because he's a really solid pitcher. I know last year the bottom fell out as far as like an ERA standpoint goes. I know it was a very short sample, but I like him to bounce back roughly a K per inning, just a solid pitcher. I would be fine with him in either format. I'm not necessarily targeting him, but he's fine. But you guys will see this. We're going to be harping on this over and over again. You need to know how these categories affect the points standings. In a vacuum, it doesn't matter if he stole a base or he hit a home run. You want the largest raw points total that you can possibly find. We glossed over like a John Berti earlier. John Berti's 31 years old. Most of his value is tied to the fact that he qualifies at 3 positions and he steals bases. And the people who are drafting him, they're pushing him up because they screwed up earlier in the draft, and they need some semblance of steals, especially in a contest that has an overall. So that's where you see that disparity there. In a points league, I am never drafting John Berti, ever. I'm never, ever doing that. But in a rotisserie league where I need steals or I need that flexibility of multiple positions, that's why he gets pushed up like that.
All right. So going on to the hitters, staying with the hitters, but going on to the best ball hitters, if you will. I'm going to rattle off a couple of guys that are on this list that all have something very obvious in common. That's Chris Taylor, David Fletcher, Ryan McMahon. All these guys are eligible in NFBC at least at 3 different positions. Some of them, in the case of David Fletcher, technically he's eligible at 6 positions since he has corner, middle, and util in addition to his individual categories. And Ryan McMahon, same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and venture, I'm going to throw out a guess in that this is the main reason why these are the type of guys that are getting bumped up in best balls, because they can be put into any of these positions based on what their stats are, what their points are for that day. A couple other guys on this list, Segura, Jorge Polanco, who will get sooner rather than later, early in the season. He'll go into the season with just shortstop, but he'll get second base quickly.
Which is huge.
Yes.
It's huge.
And second base is not exactly the deepest position. And what Jorge Polanco provides will go really well in that position. And then Bryan Reynolds, who's just outfield. But is there any other reason, Kevin, that these players are being bumped up in? Do you see anything else about these players in particular that are getting them such a big bump in best ball? Or is it all just flexibility in where they play?
I think it's mostly that flexibility. And I wish, as you were reading through this, I realized what I should have done. But I'm confident enough that it's true that I would venture to say that if we looked at the Fantrax best ball leagues where these guys are eligible at one position, they're not going nearly as high. And I'm confident in saying that without verifying it, as I should have thought of this earlier. And I don't really know why there's such a difference. I think part of it is it keeps going back to volume that Yancy keeps bringing up. Segura is going to play every day. Chris Taylor's going to play every day. Polanco, we don't know for sure now, but he's going to get a lot of playing time. Of course, we have no idea what the Rockies are going to do with McMahon. I love David Fletcher in any format. I don't really know why he's so much higher in the 12s, other than it's that position eligibility, of course. Yeah, that's it. That's what it is on all of these guys.
Mm-hmm. I will say on a case like a David Fletcher, right, does not hit for a ton of power. I know we saw last year, I think he hit 3 or 4 in a shortened season, which is very uncharacteristic for him. He's only projected to hit 1 or 2 home runs this year. Okay. In a 15-team league, especially in a league with an overall component, which, know your league. If you're not playing in an overall component, this is just your home league, then you can disregard this. But this is where the industry is moving, where everybody's playing these big competitions where you're competing against the members of your league, but also multiple leagues together. It's like a cumulative competition. David Fletcher is going to hit 2 or 3 home runs. In a league like this, where you need to be 80th percentile as a target in every single statistical category, if you were to take a 0 at just one of your starting positions, that means every other position on your roster, which includes 2 catchers in NFBC, they would have to average 26 home runs apiece for you to be 80th percentile in home runs. So David Fletcher, in that situation, if you're in a bind and you need somebody to fill in for the weekend, he can get you runs. Maybe he can get you a couple of RBI. He is not going to get you home runs. So if you're rolling him out every single day, you have dug yourself a hole when it comes to power and RBIs. So I think that's why you see that huge discrepancy there. And again, I've drafted him in a couple of spots, but he is always a backup plan for me. If I'm ever starting him in any of those positions, I think you can run amok, and that could be challenging. But players like Taylor and Segura, I don't think people realize yet just how much they're going to play. You mentioned this earlier, that I do think Chris Taylor broke out. He quietly broke out. And I think the fact that, what do we get out of Gavin Lux this year? They could have added more bats. They could have moved players around. They could have been a lot more creative with their acquisitions from the batting side. I think that Chris Taylor's going to get some serious run, and I think Gavin Lux just hangs out, and at best, he's a bench option for most of the season. That mostly explains it. But man, we're jumping around a lot and talking about a lot of different formats, but I can't say this enough. Like, you really have to understand what you're targeting and what you're trying to accomplish in these leagues. You need to know why these players are getting pushed up or they're getting pushed down. And as somebody who plays across different platforms and different game variants, and I know you guys see this, I put out links to drafts and stuff that I'm in all the time. And hey, if you guys want to come draft with me, come draft with me. And you'll see there's a disparity between those who know what the format is and those who don't. The person in a points league taking Alberto Mondesi 16th overall, they didn't read the rules. So just be mindful of that. Be cognizant of what you're trying to accomplish and really know exactly how you're going to be scoring your points.
So that actually leads me to one of my other questions is how much do these formats actually help in draft prep for your online championships or your typical home roto leagues? I see a lot of posts on Twitter of people looking, especially right now as TGFBI gets a little bit closer, people trying to start up mock drafts. And I'm of the opinion that, the only mock drafts I do are the 2 early mocks that Justin Mason does at the early year, and then the pitcherless staff mocks. I don't go into public mocks because years and years ago when I was doing them, it was over by the 5th round.
Everybody bails.
Everybody bails. Yeah. I don't find I get anything out of them. So the opinion that I want to do more draft and hold specifically to help with my draft prep, besides just doing all the normal research and following people and what have you. But with the differences in best ball and in the points formats, does that hurt you? Does that put your mind into a different position where you're all of a sudden you're talking about Mondesi, you're talking about Mondesi going 16th, 17th overall in a regular roto, but obviously you're not picking him that early in a best ball. Does that mess with your minds at all?
No, I think it helps. You notice Yancy right away, David Fletcher is projected for 1 or 2 home runs. So when he's in his drafts, he already knows that. If he's scrambling for runs, but he's heavy on power, a guy like David Fletcher will come to mind when he's on the clock and he needs to make a decision. So you're going to know more of these types of things about more players. Everybody talks about draft and holds are great because you learn the player pool. That's 100% correct. But doing different types of leagues that score differently and paying attention to how that affects players can help you in any league because you know what their strengths and weaknesses are.
To piggyback on what you're saying too, just a slight tangent, but it builds on what you're saying. Whenever I first started playing daily fantasy, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, and there were a bunch of the old guard, the original founder type people on Twitter and Facebook, and they're railing against daily fantasy, and they're saying, we spend all off season prepping and doing all this research, and if somebody just builds a lineup one time, it's not real baseball. It's like a casino. But in reality, you understand that in order to be a successful DFS player, especially over a long period, of course, anybody can buy a lottery ticket and they can win one time. It's unlikely. But for you to consistently be a winning player, it takes a ton of research. And you become hyper aware of what a player is actually good at. I need to know that, hey, they move this player around whenever they're playing a lefty versus a righty. This player moves down in the lineup. This player doesn't draw walks, like splits, a home versus away, arsenals, and what type of, it gets so super granular. And whenever you're playing across different platforms like this, points versus best balls versus this and that, I've become so aware of each individual player and how that player fits into, that game's little ecosystem. Like it really is just a compliment to like your skill set. And it really does sharpen your skills like a ton. Like instantly I did an industry draft thing that it hasn't been released yet, but like you guys will see it here relatively soon. And you could tell that they were not thinking about where they were drafting. And some of these people were people who write content and produce content and stuff. They're just picking players that they like, which is fine. Ultimately, we are here to have fun, but having that advanced knowledge and knowing exactly what a player is good at and how it affects your scoring format, it's the skeleton key. That's literally how you win these leagues. And it's not a coincidence that you see that certain players that are winning multiple industry leagues and they're different formats. Ryan Bloomfield is one of the best fantasy players in the world. Clay Link is one of the best players in the world. Gray Albright, like these people, they win every format, and it's because they're doing the homework.
Yeah, well, it's the reason why most of us probably got into fantasy baseball in the beginning to begin with. I know I started playing fantasy baseball just because I wanted to be a better baseball fan. I didn't want to just be rooting for the AL East, the Red Sox and what have you. I wanted to know more about the players all around the league and not just the big names that you see, on your baseball card collections and what have you. And so to your point, that makes complete sense. It's like the more you play in different areas and different things, it allows you to take that knowledge and adjust it to what you're going to be doing tomorrow in your draft tomorrow, whatever that format might be.
And also it makes you realize that so many more players have value in real life than you had anticipated. Players that I used to think sucked because they weren't starting pitchers, like you actually dig into these and you realize how valuable they are to a team.
All right, so we pretty much covered a couple of these other questions that I throw on my note. I'm throwing you guys' notes. I'm just going to jump to the last two on here, and that is, and I think we touched on this a little bit, but I wanted you guys to go in a little bit more detail, especially on the 50 rounders. When you guys are putting together your rosters and you're getting to your benches, so pretty much the second half of your draft, what is the makeup of those benches? Are you focused more on pitchers that you're going to stream throughout the season because you are setting your lineups every week? Are you more focused on hitters to account for injuries or big potential that you might see down the line? Do you have a strategy in that again, or is it all matter on how you built your roster in the first 20, 25 rounds?
It matters how you start. It matters how you start out. Not every multi-positional player is equal in when you're building your foundation for your roster. If it's an early round multi-position eligible player, you're planning on playing him in a certain spot, most likely. Mm-hmm. You will have the advantage of, if you need to move him, being able to, but the more of those guys you get becomes an advantage later. I think in a typical rotisserie 30-team roster with FAAB and trades, I think multi-positional eligibility, while advantageous, has become completely overblown. But in these types of leagues where we don't have the transactions, the guys that we were talking about just in the segment earlier that are multi-positional eligible going later in drafts, for every one of those guys I get, I know I'm getting another pitcher later, an extra pitcher. I want as many starting pitchers as I can get. So if I have a multi-positional eligible guy that is not a starter on my roster, I'm adding to the number of pitchers I'm going to draft later.
Yeah, I agree with that. An interesting point. I wrote this down in my notes and you just gave me the perfect tee to just hit the ball off of it. How many, take a guess real quick, guys, trivia time with the ants, okay? And the top 350, because that's the player pool we were doing the player analysis of earlier. In the top 350 ADP for NFBC, how many players do you think have multi-position eligibility? Take a guess.
I'm going to say 80.
I'm going to go a little lower. I'll go 60.
Okay. It's actually much less than 80. So this trivia question sucks, but it's 37, which to me,
oh geez,
that's almost 10% of the pool. That's a player around. Every single round, there is a multi-position player eligible. 37 out of the top 350 have multi-position eligibility. And of course, as you go further back in the ADP, it makes sense that more players would have multi-position eligibility because they're not the best hitters in the league, right? So they make the roster by being flexible. They get to play by moving around the diamond and having multi-position eligibility. Not all multi-positional players are built the same. Some of them are lefty specialists. There are less left-handed pitchers in baseball than there are right-handed players. So the ideal scenario is, I'll put him in for the weekend, but what if they aren't playing any lefties? He may not play at all. So yeah, you drafted a multi-position eligible player, but you have to make sure that he's actually going to play. As far as the roster breakdowns go, in a traditional rotisserie league that has 2 catchers and a utility and 5 outfielders, plus a corner and a middle infielder, I want to have 3 first basemen. I want to have 3 second basemen, third baseman. For catchers, if I have 2 really good catchers, which that's the thing that I've been doing a lot, is I'm taking 2, maybe not JTR. I don't want to go that low this year. I'm thinking of Will Smith or Murphy or in that range. I'm taking at least 4 catchers no matter what. And if my second catcher is not very good, I might take 5 catchers just because you have to start 2 of them and catchers get hurt a lot. As far as the outfield, again, if I have a stacked outfield and I have players on the infield, oftentimes you'll see first base outfield eligible players. You'll see second base outfield eligible players. Third base outfield is rare. It's a combination you don't see as often. And shortstop outfield is extremely rare because shortstop is the most prime position defensively. And whenever a player is, the best defender on the field, it's unlikely that they're going to move him off of that position to go into the outfield. But if we're drafting 50 rounds, I prefer to have at least 26 to 27 pitchers. And like Kevin alluded to, if I have some really strong multi-position eligible players, like a Jeff McNeil, like a Max Muncy, like a DJ LeMahieu, where I want to start them every single week. It's not like a situation with a Joey Wendell where I'm basically starting him because I have to and I don't feel great about it because he hits for almost no power. I want to start those players every single week, and it did just buy me multiple spots. So now I can take a couple more shots on a spec closer ad, or I can take a Wander Franco now because I have the redundancies at the positions that I need, and I don't have to worry about basically taking a 0 at some point in the season.
Another thing is it depends on when we're drafted these teams. These drafts started in October, and we knew who 4 closers in baseball were at that time, or were going to be in 2021. We don't know many more now, but we do know a few more. So that changes things drastically when Yancy's talking about the speculative closers. One of my draft and holds, when I drafted the team, I didn't draft a single guy that is the probable closer to start the season in most people's eyes. But I have 6 guys, and I'm going to need to get lucky on at least 2 of them.
Yeah. But it does happen like this. We mentioned Rob, pull hitter. He did not take an actual closer until the 25th round, or a relief pitcher until the 25th round. He happened to take Matt Barnes, Hector Neris, and Presley in 3 consecutive picks, and it actually really worked out for him. But even he would admit that that's not a viable strategy long term. You have to catch lightning in a bottle. Anytime you win an overall championship where there's hundreds or thousands of competitors, you have to have a lot of things go your way. Kevin, you know this. Like you were the man last year. You made a ton of really savvy decisions, but you also had to have variance on your side, right? Nobody wins the league without a little bit of help. And you need to put yourself in the best position possible by these little margin moves, like we talked about, like making sure that you have the depth, making sure that you have the positional eligibility. And if you can gain that one extra pitcher, you know, that one, if you're not sure exactly how it shapes out in San Francisco from a closer standpoint, you can add a Reyes Moranta because you have a Max Muncy. So just, it's a story. Every move in a vacuum needs to be taken into a larger context of what does my entire team look like? Where am I weak and where am I strong?
All right. And the last question I'll pose to you guys is like, how do these deep drafts help you look out for FAAB pickups throughout the year? I know the easy answer is just like these rosters are so deep. You have these guys in your mind. You're setting your lineups in these drafts and holds every week. So you see these players, but is there anything about doing these types of drafts over and over again, or just doing 1 or 2 of them that help you figure out, hey, I got this, getting a leg up on FAAB, like getting a leg up on guy a week early, or just knowing who the guy is in your leagues, especially if you're going into a league where you have players around you or managers around you that just don't have that kind of experience.
Yeah, I will say just being familiar and seeing what a player is doing. I'm not researching a player unless he's on my roster in season. I'm actively managing my teams in these leagues where I can't add and drop players. But even in these best balls and these draft and holds, it's helping me make decisions on teams that I can add players because I'm hyper aware of usage. I can look and I can see right on the thing exactly how many plate appearances this hitter got. I got to see, hey, they moved him up the lineup. I can see his draft order. It makes you hyper aware of things like that because you guys know this. There's so much information coming at us during the entire baseball season. You can get lost in the noise very quickly. But whenever you have players like this in a league where 750 players are being taken, and I'll give you a perfect example. Josh Stelmont last year, right? Everybody's like, who? He was great for me down the road. In a year where like pitching was absolutely decimated, having somebody like that was super secure, that was giving me a couple of saves, a couple of wins, and really good ratios when he pitched, that was so much more valuable than starting, I don't know, name like the worst closer or the worst starting pitcher, Cole Hamels last year or something. But just being hyper aware and seeing what usage looks like, that really helps in deep leagues.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And like you prefaced it, Adam, it's just being more aware. Also, I haven't done many only leagues. And when I have, it's been AL only. And I've always noticed, being a Royals fan, it's not just Royals, but when you're looking at the deep guys that just might get a little bit of playing time because you're in an only league and you need a warm body. It's not necessarily just Royals, but AL Central. I know who's playing for these other teams that I see play a lot. So it's the same thing with doing these drafts. You're seeing them more often. And so you're aware that they're a possibility to look for down the road.
Great. I feel way more prepared. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. All right. That's about it. Unless you guys have any questions for each other, we're going to go ahead and we can take those off air and wrap it up. Yancy, thank you so much for being our very first guest. Hopefully it's not your last time. We do hope to have as many guests as possible in season as well, talking about who they're going to be picking up without giving out maybe too much information to the other managers that are in your leagues. Our episodes do come out on Sundays. So it gives everybody an opportunity to listen and get our brains picked before their bids happen, rather than just talking about the bids that happened after the fact. So Yancy, thanks a lot. Why don't you, I know you don't create content of your own, but you do plug really good content across the industry through your Twitter account and what have you. So why don't you let everybody know who stuck around this long to listen to the entire thing, where they can follow you and where they can get in touch with you if they see so fit.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me on, Kevin. Once again, congratulations on winning. That's just amazing. Hopefully I win TGFBI this year. I'm trying so hard. I want to win so bad. I would almost win. I would almost prefer the TGFBI win over like winning my main event league or something. You know what I mean? I'm serious. That's how much I want to win it. Other than that, you guys can find me on Twitter. I'm at Yancy Eaton. It's pretty easy to find me. Like you guys mentioned, I don't really produce content. I am very busy running a real estate business with my wife. If you guys know of anybody looking to buy or sell in Florida, or in fact, anywhere in the world, I can help you find an agent. It helps my wife out. It helps me out. So feel free to reach out to me. But other than that, guys, congratulations on the podcast. It's amazing. You guys did it. You guys are naturals. You guys both have great voices. I sound like a 12-year-old boy. So I'm very jealous of how rustic and burly you guys sound. Other than that, just guys, make sure you check out Pitcher List. The new 6.0 looks amazing. A lot of hard work went into it. And I'm just super proud of everything you guys are building over here. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Yancy. Thank you for being here, of course. Thank you for the congratulations. I was super excited. I just want to add one thing quick as we're getting out of here is you're bringing up the Pitcher List 6.0. And these player pages are amazing. And there's just the strengths, weaknesses, and quirks. And we were talking about Robbie Grossman earlier, elite base stealer, triples hitter, doubles hitter. It's got all of his strengths just listed. You don't have to go digging through all of the numbers to find it even. So cool. Thank you so much for being here. It's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that on top of all the picture gifs as well on all the picture pages as
insane.
well. That's just amazing. For Kevin and Yancy, you can, of course, follow Kevin on Twitter as well at HastingKevin. You can follow myself at 80grade, all spelled out, and follow the pod at On The Wire Pod. And you can join PL Plus and pick our brains on the Discord. Yancy, you're in the Discord quite a bit as well. And so you join us all there. Check out pitcherlist.com for more information on that one as well. And of course, please review, rate the pod. We're a brand new pod. We can use all the help we can get. So if you liked what you heard, please let the world know. Special thanks again to Yancy Eaton. And for Kevin, I am Adam Howe. And with that, we bid you goodbye.
Introducing the second best buffalo thing, Cheetos Crunchy Buffalo. Nothing beats buffalo wings on game day, but with a tangy and cheesy buffalo flavor, Cheetos Crunchy Buffalo is proud to be the second best buffalo thing. Grab Cheetos Crunchy Buffalo today.
McDonald's presents Burger Reviews by Hamburglar. Today's review, the classic Big Mac, Hamburglar.
Robble, robble.
He said, there's more sauce in every bite. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Robble. Available at most restaurants in this area.
Hey parents, Greenlight is here to take one big thing off your to-do list, teaching your kids about money. With a Greenlight debit card and money app of their own, kids and teens learn to earn, save, and invest. You can send money instantly, set flexible controls, and get real-time notifications of your kids' money activity. Set up chores and put allowance on autopilot to reward them for their hard work. Then learn about the world of money together. Get 1 month free when you sign up at greenlight.com/podcast.